send the Thunder home. Lillard long range three, and it's good! Remember that guy, the podcast where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia for our peripheral players past and present. I'm James at the buzzer. Are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding you. Diaz with you again as the co-host, and we have a very special guest for this episode. Here's a guy that would never take a bad shot like Damian Lillard did. Please introduce yourself.
That's right. I'm the Carmelo Anthony of this podcast. I stand mid-range and take that two. I'm not going to pull up from 40 feet away. It's me, the special guest Xavier.
Is there ever a more cowardly comment than Paul George saying after that game that was a bad shot? Has anyone in the history of sports said a more just avoiding all possible culpability statement in their lives?
It was levels of salt that we have not seen since the Dead Sea when he gave that comment because, listen, I understand what he's saying. You're going to give up a shot from 40 feet away. In normal circumstances, you'll take that. But what I loved, you've seen the picture, there's a lady. She's like probably about 55, 60 years old. And while everybody's like edge of their seat as he's putting it up, she's pointing at her watch and slapping it and saying it's Dame time. If Gretchen in the third row knows it's Dame time, Paul George, you need to know that it's Dame time. Come on now.
Just an unhealthy amount of sodium from our friend Paul George. But speaking of our friend Xavier, how you doing right now, man? Who's making memories for you?
So, I got to start off with the obvious, but because the fact that things could look very different by the time this airs on Monday, I will just say I'm very happy with the Rangers winning Game 1, 6-2. Fingers crossed. They're still leading the series on Monday when this comes out. But I really want to talk about women's sports that are making memories for me. A couple things I want to talk about. First off, young 18-year-old American Coco Gauff into her first major final in the French Open. She will be going up against world number one Iga Świątek of Poland early tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. And she is the youngest woman to make a major final since Maria Sharapova at Wimbledon in 2004. She graduated from high school while in Paris and took graduation celebration photos in front of the Eiffel Tower during the French Open.
That's got to be pretty harsh to the other students that not only is she not at the graduation, she's still going to have better graduation pictures than anyone else that did make it to the ceremony.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm big fan of American tennis, and the women have been carrying the water for the men for a long time now, with men not having reached a single major in, I think, 17 years now since Andy Roddick. But we have some really talented women, and I would love to see Coco win. I also want to talk about the absolute juggernaut that is the Oklahoma women's softball team. I previously talked about Jocelyn Aho and her career home runs record, probably a couple of months ago now. At this point, we are in the Women's College World Series. Oklahoma is 55-2. She is hitting .497 with 29 homers and 72 RBIs.
Holly.
That's not all. So their only two losses this entire season are to fellow Big 12 teams and Women's College World Series teams, Texas and Oklahoma State. In the 5 games in the regionals/super regionals of the college softball tournament before it gets to the World Series, they scored 52 runs and had 3 mercy rule wins, which they call run rules in college softball. This run rule comes into play if a team is ever up by 8 runs or more at the end of 5 innings. They have 39 run rule wins in this season. 39 of 55 of their wins did not even go past 5 or 6 innings.
I think all the more impressive that they've had the ability to accumulate these stats. They're not even playing full games.
And as a fan, we always talk about we love free baseball, we love free softball. They need to get refunds. If you have a season ticket to see Oklahoma softball, I want at least 20% of my deposit back. I'm not even getting to see a full 7.
The thing is, they're not a one-dimensional team. Their team ERA is sub 1.
I am flummoxed by the fact that the nation allowed a school to assemble on both sides such a lopsided amount of talent.
Now they're in the tournament doing the same thing. The only team they didn't crush in the regionals and super regionals was Texas A&M, who they beat 3-2. But then they played Texas A&M again the next game, as Texas A&M won their consolation bracket game, and won 20-0 in a 5-inning run rule game. So, that's how you bounce back from a disappointing win.
I would have really been thinking to myself, too, probably as a Texas A&M fan, oh, man, we held them to 2 last time. We might have a shot here. Do you have, the box score for how quickly Texas A&M fans gave up hope in that game?
There were 9 runs in the first inning.
Okay, yeah, cool. So that hope did not linger for too long.
Yeah, our friend Jocelyn Aho hit a home run.
Only one.
In the first inning.
I mean, there was 9 runs. She got at least 2 ups, if not 3 in a 9-run inning. Come on. What are we doing, Jocelyn? Slowing down.
She singled, then came around to score, and then homered. So 2 for 2 with a homer in that inning. Sure, we can falter for not hitting 2 home runs in the inning, but they still won 20-0. Just yesterday, they opened the Women's College World Series by run-ruling Northwestern 13-2. They are just demolishing everyone. And it also helped me learn about a very cool tradition where in the Women's College World Series, whenever someone hits a home run, there is a special usher designated to go get the ball and give it to their family in the stands. And so this person, they have to do whatever it takes to get the ball. If that means, a fan has it and they got to do some negotiating or intimidation, police have been called on people who have not given up the ball.
Intimidation? What are they allowed to do?
It would be a shame if Jocelyn didn't get this home run ball, wouldn't it? Nah.
I don't want to give too much into it, but I did read that there was one thing where someone did try to leave with the ball, and they did get the cops to chase the person down. This special usher, they've got a job to do, and I'm glad that I'm not the one doing that job. But Oklahoma women's softball, fantastic, absolute juggernaut. And the last thing I want to say real quick was, Kathy Engelbert, you can get back in my good graces by giving Philadelphia a WNBA expansion team. We deserve it.
We deserve it. We need it. I need a basketball team that won't perpetually disappoint me. Just make it happen, please. Josh Harris, you scumfuck, if you do any good thing in your life ever, just finance this team and make it the best team in the WNBA. Stop buying NFTs. Start buying WNBA teams, please, Josh Harris.
Well, with that plea to Josh Harris Diaz, until he does that, and until he makes those memories for you, who's making memories for you right now?
So, making memories for me is the greatest fantasy football dispute of all time. Just the greatest thing I've really seen come out of Major League Baseball in terms of its drama. Because I think we can agree, right? The NBA is probably the most dramatic sport.
Yes.
NFL can be dramatic, but MLB, these guys are they're very, very low drama. It's a sport. It's almost an unwritten rule that there is no drama.
There's not a lot of personality.
Not a lot of personality, and no drama on the field. But the greatest fantasy football dispute ever between, namely, Tommy Pham and Jock Peterson. Now, there's been a lot of back and forth on who's at fault here, what the actual issue was. My understanding is that Jock Peterson was stashing people on his injured reserve. Tommy Pham wasn't happy about this, thought it was roster manipulation. And, of course, now the slap heard around the world. And Tommy Pham slaps Jock Peterson in the outfield, draws a 3-game suspension for slapping him.
It was a really good slap. The only video we have of it is from quite far away, but he gets some whiplash on Jock Peterson's head.
You can see the hair whip back from Jock. His blonde, I love the blonde locks that he has going for him now.
It's a great look.
But what I love even more is that the drama continued to develop when Tommy Pham said, I blame Mike Trout, the commissioner of this league, as much, if not more, than anybody else. Which, this was already a great drama, but now we're talking about arguably the number 2 best player in MLB right now behind his teammate.
I'd say at worst number 2.
At worst number 2. And Trout's the commish. I would love to be a fly on the wall of this group chat as this was all going down. I would Love to have seen the drama unfold in real time, but even if we can't see that, we can see the aftermath of it. And God, just I love how these guys presumably they've never slapped an opponent over the baseball games that they play on the field for their livelihood. But then they will slap each other over fantasy football, which I just love. Dudes rock. It's an all-time dude success story, I think. And I hope that there's a part two. I hope that they go public with the league this year. I want to see who wins. I want to see the drama. I love it.
I also
this really is the most just guys being dudes. What's better than that story that you could possibly have? I need the Dawes to somehow narrate this season of this fantasy league.
He held on to this grudge for 9 months. This happened in September of that fantasy football season, theoretically. Have they not interacted once in person since then? And he's just for 9 months, I'm going to slap the shit out of Jock Peterson the next time I see him.
Well, how much, again, this is why I would love to see the group chat. How much of a jerk about it was Jock Peterson being?
He sent so we know that he did send a GIF where there are 3 weightlifters, and there is a logo of an NL West team superimposed over all 3 of these weightlifters, and one of them is the San Francisco Giants, one of them is the Los Angeles Dodgers, and one of them is the San Diego Padres. There's 2 large gentlemen and a more slender woman, and they do this weightlifting thing. I don't know exactly what the object is, but they throw this heavy object into the air, all 3 of them. It's probably some video for a gym or something, and it comes kind of crashing back down on the head of the woman who, of course, had the San Diego Padres logo on it. This was meant to kind of dramatize the way that last year did not necessarily go the way that San Diego Padres fans and members of the organization intended for it to go. And Tommy Pham reports there are multiple San Diego Padres players in the league, but he in particular, who was on the Padres at the time, seems to have taken this quite hard. Therefore, for 9 months, he held on to this grudge so that he could slap Jock Peterson upside the head.
You know what? I can't wait until Dimitri slaps me in 9 months for drafting George Karlaftis 1 pick before he had planned to make a dramatic announcement in drafting his Greek brethren, and absolutely getting not angry, but very upset over the draft Zoom call about me taking him. So now I'm expecting that to happen. Everything is just going to be settled by slaps now. It's going to be like duels olden times. Take out your dueling glove, slap someone across the face with it.
I would love to codify that in our Constitution. What constitutes a slap? And under which circumstances is a slap justified? I would love to codify it into not just our dynasty constitution, but the dude constitution, really. I think that we can all agree that there's sometimes that doesn't matter how much you're my dude, sometimes you gotta get slapped. Let's define it.
I'll propose it in the group chat later on.
Tommy Pham, Jock Peterson, thank you. Please keep it up. Please keep us posted on this league. But James, curious who would be making memories for you?
Well, it would be easy for me to talk about another Jeopardy sensation. It would be easy for me to talk about Ryan Long. I mean, he's a Philly Uber driver. He's won 15 straight as of today, June 2nd, 2022. I mean, just yesterday, June 1st, he had a clue asking which AL East team in the category Ballpark Fun typically shouts the letter O during the national anthem. So, of course, the response was Orioles. It would be easy for me to talk about all of that, but I'm not going to talk about Ryan Long. Because instead, I found out about a guy who, this week, decided to break a world record. This guy's name is Francois-Marie Dibon. And up until about a decade ago, he was deathly terrified of heights, like absolutely scared of them. And he decided at one point to finally bungee jump to try and get over this. And he's gotten into bungee jumping. After this 10 years of training, he set out to set a world record for the most bungee jumps completed in a 24-hour period. Now, the record was set in 2017 by New Zealand's Mike Hurd. 430 bungee jumps in a 24-hour period. That is what Mike Hurd did. The stress that just physically puts on your body, wrenching up and down that many times. Well, Francois-Marie Dibon passed that record in 10 hours. Francois-Marie Dibon in Scotland, with a full 24 hours to complete this, worked night and day, with one 50-minute break about halfway through. And he, in 24 hours, completed 765 successful bungee jumps. That is one every 109 seconds.
My brain would have so many concussions at that point. I might have one brain cell left.
He did say, I'm going to take a break now. This was the last time for a little bit. But, I mean, the previous record was almost doubled. Just a titanic performance by Mr. Francois-Marie Dumont, who's 44 years old, by the way. This is not a spry gentleman necessarily. This is a 44-year-old man who once again jumped 765 times in 24 hours.
I'm just trying to imagine what is the training that you do for this besides just bungee jumping. Like,
you have to. He talked a little bit about like going into the kind of G-force training that they will essentially do for fighter pilots.
I mean, bungee jumping is also just a classic guys being dudes thing as well, I think. Because there's no reason to do it other than, it looks fun. Initially.
It's pointless.
Like the cons heavily outweigh the pros.
If everything goes perfectly at the end of bungee jumping, all of the work that you will have done gets you back to the point you started at. That's if everything goes well.
Exactly. Like, even like in the upper like 10% of outcomes probably is like, you know, fucking getting that thing like yanking on your crotch. I can't feel too good. Like, that's still like a best case scenario. Is like sore testicles. It's a best case scenario.
Before we find ourselves dwelling on sore testicles, Diaz, why don't you go ahead and bring us into the meat and potatoes of everything this week?
Yeah, we'll get into the main course, and what we're looking for this week is guys who had their one shining moment, is one way to put it. Another way you could put it is that they were a one-hit wonder. But essentially what we're looking for is those guys that came bursting into the scene, bursting into the national consciousness, and just as quickly faded back into, not Bolivian, as Mike Tyson once said, but into oblivion, never to be heard from again. And the reason I bring up that Mike Tyson quote is that my guy this week is going to be the person who is best known for ending Mike Tyson's unbeaten heavyweight streak to open his career and to become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. From Columbus, Ohio to Tokyo, Japan for his crowning moment, I am talking about James Buster Douglas.
Yep.
And there's a lot more to the Buster Douglas story than just that one night. There's a lot that led him to that point. So as we start from the beginning, as we always do, hoping that get a bigger appreciation for some of these one-hit wonders, because it's one moment that they're in the spotlight, but it's a lifetime that leads up to that moment. So I think that's always important to remember. But for James Buster Douglas, that lifetime begins April 7th, 1960. He's born in Columbus, Ohio. Whole family, Columbus, Ohio men, and the family is also a boxing family. So his father, Bill, was not quite a top contender. He was maybe what you would call the guy that you beat before you get to be considered a contender. A gatekeeper, if you will.
He's kind of like a mini boss for a protagonist boxer, but he is not the protagonist boxer himself.
Right. He's never going to fight for a championship, but he's going to be the guy that you fight to then, like, okay, now you get to fight the other guys who are fighting for a championship. That being said, Bill still had a pretty good career himself, fighting between the middle and light heavyweight divisions. He goes 41, 16, and 1 for his career. So nothing to sneeze at. A very respectable career for Bill. But boxing ran through Bill's blood, and this is really his life's work, is boxing. To the extent that he runs the local gym at the Blackburn Recreation Center in downtown Columbus. And from a young age, you know, from the time that Buster was about 8 or 9 years old, his dad would be taking him down to the gym just to like get in some work on the pads. But Buster's passion was not boxing. In fact, it never really was boxing. Buster was a basketball player, first and foremost. So at Lyndon McKinley High School, he letters in both football and basketball. But as I said, basketball is his primary sport. And in 1977, he leads Lyndon McKinley to the Class 3A state championship. So he is a state champion starting at power forward for the basketball team. After he graduates high school, he goes to Coffeyville Community College, where as a 6-foot power forward in his 1 year playing there, made enough of an impression to be inducted into that school's Athletics Hall of Fame. So before even anything from his boxing career, he is already one of the greatest basketball players in the history of this community college. So a natural athlete from a young age. So he plays his year at Coffeyville. He goes now the next year to play at Sinclair, which is a community college in Dayton. And on the basis of that, he actually gets offered a full-time scholarship to Mercyhurst, which is a Division II school. So coming up through community college to junior college, he now got a scholarship to play at Mercyhurst. But before he can get to Mercyhurst, he said, you know what? Let me go back home. Let me see what's up with this boxing thing. He goes back to Columbus to train with his dad.
What is the take? Because I was wondering this as you list all these other sports. What are the other coaches saying about him boxing? That just seems like a sport that anyone else would kind of be like, hey, would you mind not doing that if you're going to be on our team for other things?
So let me be clear. He decided basically when he entered high school, like, I'm not doing this boxing thing really anymore.
Okay.
I'm focusing on basketball and football. Because he was never really into it. It was more of like, this is what my dad did, this is what my dad wants me to do. I'll do it because my dad wants me to do it, but like, it was never really his passion. Like, he would even say like, look, I never wanted to fight. He said my mom had to make me fight. So both the parents are trying to push him in this boxing direction, and finally, after he bounces around community college and D2 college basketball, he decides, you know what? Let me go back home, let me be with the family, and let me give this boxing thing a try. Makes his pro debut on May 31st, 1981. He's just turned 21 years old at this time. Starts off with a third-round TKO victory over a guy by the name of Dan O'Malley. Dan O'Malley is just your standard local fighter. He's a professional, but certainly nobody that has ever done much of anything. He fights a lot of guys like this to open up his career. Starts 5-0, and then in his sixth fight, he's starting to think he's hot shit. So he starts 5-0, and he rolls into this fight about 20 pounds overweight. Weight management has always kind of been the thing, something that Buster struggled with. Even high school coaches would say this. If he could have just stayed in shape, he could have been an even better player. But he shows up to this fight 20 pounds overweight and gets knocked out by David Bay. David Bay, at the time, this looks like a horrible loss, a horrible setback. David Bay was no slouch either. He would eventually go on to fight for the heavyweight title, where he was knocked out by Larry Holmes, as were many people that fought Larry Holmes.
But you had a shot.
He got there. He continues through this early career kind of floating on that same periphery that his father was kind of stuck on. Never really threatening to contend for a title. Bouncing around, winning fights, but certainly not a king, certainly not even a kingmaker at this point. He takes a TKO loss to a guy by the name of Mike White, and after this, he gets a manager. This manager is somebody that he's able to connect with, because this is also a Columbus man. A former assistant coach alongside Woody Hayes at Ohio State. His boxing manager is a man by the name of John Johnson.
A good, upstanding name.
It's a good, very basic John Johnson.
A good, we don't have the rights to the actual coach for this team, but we need to put a face on the sideline of this 2K game.
A placeholder, if you will. But John Johnson is no placeholder. In fact, to start, he is actually a plate holder. So we dive into the first business meeting between John Johnson and Buster Douglas. Buster recounts it as they sat down and John Johnson grabbed a paper plate and held it up. And he said, you know what this is? Buster was very confused. What is it? He said, it's empty. You stick with me, we're going to have $1 million on this plate by the time we're done. That was enough to convince Buster. He said, all right, I believe in this guy. He believes in me. I'm with him. So this is the first time he has a manager. He still had his father training him the whole time. But now he has a manager. And the manager is going to try to guide his career in better ways than maybe his father would be able to. He's got some connections. So one connection that he has is at a nightclub in downtown Columbus. And he thinks, let me really introduce this hometown kid to the hometown fans. Let's put on a fight at the nightclub and set him up for an easy knockout victory. Let's get people behind him. Let's start building up his name. So he fights David Starkey in this nightclub. Sure enough, he gets a first round knockdown. Starkey's down on one knee. And from one knee, he immediately grabs Buster by both his legs and tackles him to the ground. Both corners empty into the ring. Some spectators empty into the ring. It's a full-on brawl melee. And this fight is declared a no contest. I wish that there was no video that I could find of this. Just some very light articles that were written about it. But from what details that there were, I so wish that this could have been on video. It sounds like an incredible thing. And if there's anybody out there listening that was at, I don't have the name of the nightclub, but if you were at a nightclub in Columbus, Ohio in the mid-'80s and you saw a fight that led to a brawl, send us an email. We'd love to hear more.
Sorry, wait, a fight that led to a brawl? If anyone saw a fight that led to a brawl in Columbus in a nightclub in the mid-'80s, that's a pretty wide net that you're casting, friend.
A professional fight. Fight, the first one. That'll hopefully slightly narrow it. But anyway, after this, he actually has a fight set up with his manager again to fight one of the top contenders in the heavyweight division. Now, this isn't a champion, but this is one of the guys next up. He has a fight against Trevor Berbick. Now, the issue is that Trevor Berbick pulls out 3 days before it due to an injury. So they get a replacement, and this is a man whose legal name would lead you to think that he was a wide receiver catching passes from Aaron Rodgers, but Randall Tex Cobb was, in fact, a boxer back in the 80s, right on that fringe. And
which honestly is a much more, I think, reasonable assumption if I first heard the name Randall Cobb. I would assume boxer before football receiver.
Well, especially in Randall Tex Cobb's case. The nickname Tex. Tex is not a wide receiver. Tex is maybe a fullback. But Tex Cobb steps in on 3 days' notice and, to his credit, fights to a decision and takes a 10-round majority decision loss to Buster. So Buster, his first official fight on the record with John Johnson, starting to make some headway. But in the course of the next 6 fights, again, now fighting more contenders, does all right. He goes 4-2, but the last of these is a 10th round TKO loss to a man by the name of Tony Tucker. It was kind of the same story as it would always be for Buster in his losses at this early part of his career. Opened up great, got gassed, was out of energy, got TKO'd in the 10th. Now, this leads to a big fallout with Dad. After a lot of finger-pointing, whose fault is it, Buster decides it's best to go forward in another direction. So he fires his dad as his trainer. But he's still going to keep it in the family. So instead he's going to go to his uncle, who is J.D. McCauley, also a former boxer. So it's always great when you can go from your father, who's a trainer, to just your uncle, who's a trainer. Floyd Mayweather actually did this, the same as well. Floyd Sr. was his trainer at first before it became Roger.
Very Shakespearean.
It is. You have no idea how great it is that you said that, James, and I'm going to get to it in a little bit, I promise. So, again, after this big fallout, J.D. McCauley is now going to be his trainer. He rattles off 4 straight before he gets 2 consecutive fights with contenders to try to be the number 1 contender for the heavyweight belt. And your prize, if you get that, is you get to fight Mike Tyson. He finally does get the match with Trevor Berbick, which he does win by a 10-round decision. Then the next fight is against Oliver McCall. Winner gets the right to fight Mike Tyson for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. And Oliver McCall falls by decision, not by knockout, to Buster Douglas. So because of this, he now has the rights to fight Tyson. It's a swift negotiation with Tyson and Don King, obviously. He wants to fight. Tyson's going to take most of the money. But it doesn't matter because he's got a shot at the heavyweight title of the world. Now, this is where I'm going to call back to your comment, James, about it being Shakespearean, because it's very important to note that in the lead up to this fight, Buster Douglas decides to get a dog. Names this dog Shakespeare. So with Shakespeare the dog by his side, he enters training camp. Now, unfortunately, 23 days before the fight, tragedy does befall the Douglas family when Buster's mom dies very unexpectedly. Was not sick, anything like that, just kind of passes away overnight. So with this information A lot of the pundits were already saying it was, Tyson's going to dominate. This is just another victim in the line for Mike Tyson. After this, he goes from a long shot to a no shot, basically. And to illustrate that, there is almost no sports book that is offering any kind of bet on this fight. There is one book that posts odds, and the Mirage Casino in Las Vegas posts a 42-1 odds for Buster Douglas to pull off the unthinkable and become the first person to defeat Mike Tyson. To help illustrate where we are and to call back to just how unlikely this was going to be. These are commentators Larry Merchant and Jim Lampley, two of the best to ever do it, but they were HBO's commentary team, and they were in Tokyo, Japan this night. Larry Merchant, right before the bell rang, says, if he should shock the world, it will make the shocks in Eastern Europe, remember Yugoslavian conflict going on at the time, seem like local ward politics.
What?
Larry Merchant loves some mildly racist but not directly outrageous comments.
Where does that fall on the recent Nestor the Molester name for Nestor Cortez Jr.?
Oh,
which
God,
one of those is worse, Yugoslavian war crimes or Nestor the Molester?
Well, I'll give you one more because I'm gonna give you another thing that Larry Merchant said later in this fight.
Oh Christ!
So the fight is in Tokyo, Japan, and he said these fans came here expecting to see Godzilla. They didn't know which guy was gonna be Godzilla. So again, it's straddling that line of like, I guess you didn't say anything directly horrible, but I don't like the undertones.
It's not good. Yeah, no, it's.
I don't like the undertones, but after Larry Merchant toes the line of is this acceptable to say, and in the 80s was probably not even close to being crossed. That's why he said it. Anyway, Larry Merchant says that. Jim Lampley says he would shock the world if he can even make it to the middle rounds. For a lot of people, like, you know the moment that Douglas wins the fight. We've all seen a knockdown, Tyson doesn't get up. What a lot of people don't realize is it wasn't like a flash knockdown, it wasn't a fluke or anything like that. Douglas was dominating from the early rounds. He had a pretty significant reach advantage on Tyson, so he was able to keep him at bay with his jab, and he was also catching him with the right cross. Tyson kind of set himself up for this. So what made Tyson so great early on is obviously everybody knows about the frightening knockout power, but it wasn't that he came out swinging for the fences. He would kind of bob and duck under and like weave his way in until he got in the right position, and then he'd throw it. Coming into this fight, he said, I'm just going to throw it. So was almost setting himself up there for failure. Shakespearean and almost calling his own demise. But again, just a marked difference from his original approach. He's getting dominated these early rounds, and by round 5, you can start to see that Tyson's eye is getting very swollen. And this is where we realize that it's not just Tyson himself that maybe was underestimating Buster Douglas, was maybe not taking this fight as seriously as he should have. His corner wasn't either. So there's a tool in boxing, and I guess you would also use it in MMA, that's known as an Enswell. It's essentially a sheet of metal that you just keep on ice. So then when the guy comes back between rounds, you're going to firm press that against any swelling to try to tamp it down, to try to minimize it as much as possible. The corner didn't bring an Enswell, so you think, okay, well, they'll just package up some ice and they'll just throw that on there. They did not even bring ice packs. So,
wow.
Realizing now the peril that Tyson is in, they took a latex glove and filled it with cold water. And this is the tool that they were able to use to try to keep down his swelling.
It's like criminally liable for someone's health.
It's criminally liable. It's criminally negligent. Like, this is the heavyweight championship of the world. And I understand that Tyson is seemingly invincible at this point. But dude, anybody can get some swelling. Unreal. So they're using this to try to keep the swelling down. But again, through 7 rounds, in watching the fight, this was the first time I watched the fight the full way through. I, at most, would have give 1 round to Tyson. Like, it's probably 6-1, 7-0 Buster Douglas on the cards at this point. But the great thing about boxing, the great thing especially about heavyweight boxing, is all it takes is 1 punch, right? So in round 8, Mike Tyson actually lands that punch on Buster Douglas. Even though he's been getting dominated, he comes in with one of his dipping down, exploding up, right uppercuts, one of his most famous punches, and Buster gets knocked down. Now, by the count of 3, Buster's already kind of like hitting the canvas, punching it like in frustration himself. He was absolutely cleaned out by this punch, but still had his senses about him. The ref enters into what some people would call a slow count. Everybody knows you count to 10, that's it. But it's not a firm 10 seconds, it's 10 as counted by the referee. So people thought the ref was maybe taking a little too much time between. By the time Buster Douglas got to his feet from the time that he did hit the ground, officially 11 and a half seconds did elapse. But it is important to know that the boxer is also taking his sweet time. Buster was on one knee and did not even go to try to push up until the ref said 8. So all of that is important context as well, I think. Buster beats
11 and a half isn't that much more than 10. If you told me it was like 15, I'd call bullshit. But like it's 11 and a half.
Right. It's close. And again, if the ref counted faster, who says he doesn't get up faster? Very luckily, though, for Buster Douglas, this knockdown occurred right at the end of the round. So he gets up. You can tell he's still a little off balance, not 100% there. But it is the end of the round. So all he has to be able to do is walk back to his corner. He sits down. About 40 seconds in the round 9, Tyson wobbles Douglas again, and Tyson smells blood. He's kind of going for the kill. Spends the next 30 seconds kind of just like swinging wildly, never really catching Douglas. And this might have been the point that Tyson ended up playing himself a little bit. Because as he now slows down to try to catch his breath, this is when Douglas starts coming back. Right around the 1 minute mark left in the round, he caught him with a very, very firm 1-2 right down the middle. And the rest of the round, they're just both swinging wildly. Neither's really connecting, but it's looking like a desperate Tyson. Kind of just throwing everything he can, hoping to get the knockout. But now with this 1 minute break between rounds, they come back for round 10. Buster Douglas comes back in with a game plan again. Tyson comes out swinging right from the gate, hits him with a clean right straight, but Douglas quickly regains control, goes back to jabbing him. At this point, Tyson's eye from these jabs is swollen shut to the point that Larry Merchant said he is virtually a one-eyed fighter. So if you can't see the punches coming, it's going to make it a little harder to guard against them. That is what leads to one of the most famous sequences in heavyweight boxing. You've all seen it. Tyson gets rocked with that uppercut. You see his head pop back. You can see in his body language he's almost not even there at that point. A combo follows. A left cross finally puts him down to the ground. Tyson gets to his knees pretty quickly, I think. The issue is the punch knocked his mouthpiece out as well. So Tyson spends about 4 or 5 seconds of this count fumbling for his mouthpiece instead of just trying to get to his feet. He doesn't actually grab the mouthpiece till there's about 7. Finally starts to try to push up at about 8.5, 9 as the ref's saying it. But ultimately does not get to his feet in time. Ref waves it off. And in an instant, Buster Douglas becomes Cinderella overnight. In fact, what Larry Merchant said is what Buster Douglas has done here tonight makes Cinderella look like a sad story. So the least racist of all of his remarks that night. Still a little weird to say. Jim Lampley says, let's go ahead and call it the biggest upset in the history of heavyweight fights. Merchant immediately comes back in after and says, I would be willing to say it's the greatest upset in boxing history. Then Larry Merchant has given some, let's say, tense post-fight interviews in his day. And this was one of the more awkward ones that he ended up doing with Buster Douglas. He gets in there and says, Buster Douglas, undisputed champion of the world, can you believe that? Buster immediately says, yeah, because it happened. Because
wow.
I wanted it. Why did it happen? Because I wanted it. I whooped his ass. He came to fight. I came to fight. I was very relaxed. I wasn't afraid of the man. So Buster's almost defiant in the immediate aftermath of this. Tyson had to be explained to him by Don King what had happened. Because Tyson kept saying, like, why is everybody in the ring like the fight's still going on? And it finally took Don King grabbing him and saying, Mike, you lost. You lost the fight. Until he finally processed what had actually happened. But then not very long after this, so the post-fight interview in the ring that Buster did, this hasn't happened yet, but by the time he gets back for the press conference, Don King and Mike Tyson have filed a formal protest of the victory. Because of the slow count, they're saying that this was bullshit and that Buster was actually down for more than 10 seconds. Again, this is not a legitimate protest, but it's enough to bother Buster. I mean, he would say afterwards, like, I felt like they didn't want to let me enjoy it that night. Like, I had to worry about it. And again, like, I want to remind you, his mom died 23 days before this fight. So
Yeah.
an incredibly emotionally turbulent time in his life. And the title that he justly won is immediately being questioned because they can't accept that they actually lost. But it doesn't really matter because Buster Douglas has all the belts, and what else he has is a lot of the promotional appearances that you get to go with that. So just under 2 weeks later, Mike Tyson was set to be the special guest referee in the WWF Championship between Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage. We can't have Tyson coming in after he just lost the belt. So Vince moves swiftly to sign Buster Douglas for this. He comes in and ends up knocking out Macho Man Randy Savage after the bout with a nice left hook again. Puts him down. It was very real. You should look it up if you want to see it.
How quickly does he knock him out?
So they do the thing where he's the ref and then Macho Man pushes him and then Buster's trying to stay calm, so he pushes back. And then Macho Man goes for a punch. Buster ducks it, and then just a classic wrestling setup.
So he lasts even less time against Buster Douglas than he did against Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. Good to know.
Yes. Yeah, no, that is, yes. Spider-Man's got nothing on Buster. So as I mentioned, Tyson and Don King filed this protest. They dropped it 4 days later, but it was enough to leave a real sour taste in Buster's mouth. It's enough that Buster doesn't really want to give them a rematch. So he refuses and instead says, you know what? You thought I was the tune-up for your big fight with Holyfield. How about I have a big fight with Holyfield? So Evander Holyfield is coming up from cruiserweight. He was the undisputed cruiserweight champion. He was the first person ever to unify the belts at the cruiserweight division. So he wanted to take the next step up to heavyweight. So he fights Buster Douglas for the heavyweight championship of the world. And as I mentioned in the beginning of his career, one thing that he always struggled with the lack of motivation, is his weight. He does come in 15 pounds overweight for this fight and opens the first 2 rounds getting pretty thoroughly outclassed. Vander just is very much clearly the better boxer. Round 3, you can tell he's a little aggravated. He goes for that same right uppercut that knocked out Tyson. Vander very quickly slips back, comes right back with the right straight of his own, absolutely floors Buster. He kind of looks like he's going to get up at first, and then he just lays down flat on his back. Doesn't even get close to making the count. Mills Lane waves it off, and Buster Douglas is no longer the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. But managed to do pretty well. That paper plate that we mentioned at the very beginning is filled with not $1 million, but as a result of that fight, direct purse, he makes $24.6 million.
That's a lot of
plates.
plates.
Did he get knocked out in the 3rd round? Yes. But paid $24.6 million for that fight. Now, with that, again, as I mentioned, boxing was never really Buster's thing to begin with. Kind of just did it to try to stay in shape. He got the belts. He got all the money he could ever imagine of getting. So his motivation is really just gone. So he does not officially retire from boxing, but what he does start doing is eating and drinking a lot. So he actually balloons up to 400 pounds. His fighting weight was about 250. And there's really no end in sight of this except for the fact that he would then enter a diabetic coma about 5 years after his last fight. Nearly dies, but he does make it out of it. And he took this as the wake-up call that he needed to start getting back in shape. So what does he turn back to? He turns back to boxing. And after about 6-7 months of heavy training, he's feeling ready to get back in the ring. He runs off 6 straight victories. 6 years after this fight to Holyfield, he finally resumes, gets his weight back under control, runs off 6 straight victories, which actually sets up an opportunity to get another heavyweight belt. Now, IBA is not one of the 4 main belts. It's very much a B, dare I even say C-level belt, but it is a heavyweight title. So he fights Lou Savarese, gets the chance to reclaim a heavyweight championship, and he gets knocked out in the 1st round. Just never really stood a chance. Lou Savarese was, at this point, one of the top contenders, and Buster was now about 6-7 years removed and a diabetic coma removed from being heavyweight champion of the world. So the fact that he even got there is, I think, to be admired, but does get knocked out. He goes out with 2 more fights. He fights against 2, essentially, cans, which the boxing term is just, when the FBS team schedules the FCS team at the start of the season to win 70-0, that's who he fights. He gets two first-round knockouts and decides to call it a career. Still involved in boxing to this day, though, so he continues to train fighters in Columbus. Not at the same gym, unfortunately, but he does train fighters in Columbus. As of 2020, he said he'd love to fight Mike Tyson again. So this was in the aftermath of when Tyson fought Roy Jones Jr. He said, look, I'm still staying in pretty good shape, training all my fighters, and if you give me 8 weeks' notice, I can do a fight. So, to be continued, Tyson Douglas 2, who knows? Could happen.
We live in a time of long-delayed reboots and sequels. Honestly, it would kind of go with the cultural moment that we exist in now.
No one wants to see 60-year-olds beat the crap out of each other.
That's okay. Here's the thing. Do I personally want
yourself,
to? Do I personally want to? No, but I completely recognize there are plenty of people even more sick than Diaz that genuinely want to see that. Diaz wants to see it in like an ironic sense, because I think you understand Diaz.
Listen.
There's not going to be a whole lot of athleticism put on. There are plenty of people who would very sincerely pay a lot of money to see that.
Listen, I watch YouTube guys fight dunk contest participants. Like, I love seeing any two guys that are willing and able to fight each other. I think that's could it happen? Who knows? I would like to see it. Maybe Xavier doesn't want to see it, but there's a certain morbid curiosity to seeing how that would go. One last fun fact just to throw out for Buster. As a Columbus, Ohio native, he is one of the only non-Ohio State grads ever to dot the I in the Ohio marching band for the football games. One of the only non-graduates ever. So
that's cool.
Just a neat little nugget to send it out on. But yeah, that is the one shining moment, the one-hit wonder, almost literally in the boxing sense. James Buster Douglas. Just a very complete story arc. Again, dare I say, as you said, James, Shakespearean.
Very dramatic. The hubris is there, the hubristic fall. There is a woman that is goading someone into an aggressive action. There's honestly a lot of Shakespearean tropes in this. And hey, if you need to analyze that, you can turn to our After Hours show, where we dissect the show that we just previously recorded.
It's like Talking Guys. It's actually,
precisely.
It's hosted by, what's his face? Joel McHale? Is that the guy?
No, Chris Hardwick. Yeah, Chris Hardwick comes and joins
the
the three of us, and then the four of us all just talk about the thing that we did for the last 2 hours.
If you want that content, though, you gotta pay a little extra. So, slip me a DM on Twitter if you want that. So, that's it for my one-hit wonder, but I know Xavier's got a great follow-up act, hopefully a better follow-up than Buster's fight against Evander. So, what do you got, Xavier?
I'm going to take a page out of James's playbook here and open with a call. Boise State for the win. They hand it off to Johnson. Boise State has won the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl. Can you believe it?
Tom Brenneman on the call.
I want to talk about Ian Johnson.
I, real quick, before you talk about Ian Johnson, just want to talk about the fact that I'm mad that we have to take things like the name Tostitos Fiesta Bowl seriously. I'm upset about bowl culture making me care about Duke's mayonnaise.
Well, here's the thing. I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think a lot of the names made sense. Tostitos Fiesta Bowl. Sure, I'm with that. FedEx Orange Bowl. Yeah, orange, that's one of your main colors. Okay. Now, maybe it was because I was born into this and I was not yet aware of the horrors of corporatism. But those at least seem to make sense. The Rose Bowl was unsullied by anything because, of course, it was. But Ian Johnson,
born September 25th, 1985 in San Dimas, California, just a half hour outside of LA. He attended Damien High School in Laverne, where he didn't get much recruiting coverage, but was discovered by accident by Boise State assistant coach Robert Prince, who was scouting Patrick Chung, whose high school team was playing Johnson's. So this coach, he's there to see Pat Chung, and is like, who's this guy on the other team? He's like, I'm going to keep that in mind. He keeps going after Chung. Chung does go to Oregon instead, but they stay in touch with Ian Johnson. And eventually, he does commit to Boise State, who at this point were only 8 years removed from being in what was then known as Division I AA, now known as the FCS. So Boise State is pretty brand new at this point. This was the Dan Hawkins era of Boise. They had just joined the WAC in 2001 after their first couple of years of Division 1A being in the Big West Conference. Boise State joins the WAC. They're doing okay in the WAC. They're doing good. I'll say that. They're winning the WAC, but no one really cares about the WAC at this point. So despite,
they're really just whacking off.
Yeah, so despite winning the WAC, they're playing in the Humanitarian Bowl, the Fort Worth Bowl. Nothing really major. People really aren't paying attention much to them. So Johnson redshirts during the 2004 season. Boise State again wins the WAC, but loses to Louisville in the Liberty Bowl. James is really enjoying every time I say WAC, and now I'm going to keep a mental note of that.
It's really funny. It's just funny.
Hey, the WAC is coming back. They're bringing it back. So, in 2005, Johnson's redshirt freshman year, he becomes their backup running back. And he rushes for 663 yards and 4 touchdowns as Boise State goes 9-4. They lost in the MPC Computers Bowl, what is now the Potato Bowl, which was at Boise State's stadium, was then the MPC Computers Bowl because, of course, every bowl back then had companies that no longer exist.
Enron had a stadium.
Gateway had a conference.
Wait, really?
Northern Illinois and Northern Iowa and Southern Illinois played in the Gateway Conference.
I thought that was just because they're based around the Missouri area. That was actually named after Gateway, the company.
I'm pretty sure. I feel like I remember the conference's logo being Gateway.
I see that the Gateway Collegiate Athletic Conference was a women's-only conference from 82 to 92 when it was absorbed by the Missouri Valley Conference. They kept the name Gateway and then changed it to Missouri Valley.
That also
I don't know.
Checks out.
I don't know, but I like that idea, so I'm just going to pretend that did happen because I like that.
It.
So, after the season, Boise is returning a large number of key players, and they're expecting a bit of a bounce back year, even though they're under a new coach, Chris Peterson. Ian Johnson is ready to grab hold of the starting running back position this year. Relatively uneventful opener against FCS Sacramento State. Easy blowout victory. And then they welcome the Oregon State Beavers to Boise. This is a good Oregon State team. This is the Matt Moore 10-win ranked Oregon State team, so not a bad team. Oregon State scores the first 2 touchdowns in the game to take a 14-0 lead. Then Ian Johnson takes over. In less than 15 minutes of game time, he rushes for 3 touchdowns and then adds 2 more in the second half as Boise cruised to a 42-14 win. Johnson rushed for 240 yards to go along with his 5 touchdowns, and that's with sitting out the last 11 minutes of the game.
Hell yeah.
After some off games, which for him is still 90 yards and a touchdown against Utah and Louisiana Tech, Johnson goes on a 4-game run where he compiles 660 yards rushing and 11 touchdowns against New Mexico State, rival Idaho, Fresno State, and San Jose State. After the San Jose State game, Johnson starts feeling a bit sick, a bit unwell in the locker room, and he gets taken to the hospital, where it's discovered that he had a partially collapsed left lung that was from a hit in the second quarter, where he had multiple ribs broken that messed up his lungs. And he continued to play through this collapsed lung and broken ribs, and he was needed because he helped Boise end up winning on a last-second field goal 23-20. But right after this, he's hospitalized for 5 days with a tube in his chest.
In addition to having that dog in him, he had what sounds like shards of bone in his lungs also.
Yes, I wish this was a visual format where I could show this is the x-ray I got that shows I got that dog in me, because I do love that picture. While he's in the hospital, he misses the home finale against Utah State. But it's going to take more than that to stop Ian Johnson. He comes back the very next week for the final regular season game against Nevada. And while wearing a protective flak jacket, he runs for 147 yards and 3 touchdowns as Boise State completes an undefeated regular season.
Is that allowed? And also, if that's allowed, why is that not done more regularly?
I mean, I would assume that it probably feels heavier, and a lot of running backs might not want heavier stuff on them.
I guess, man, but I'm not saying done all the time. I feel like we should hear about more people wearing Kevlar vests in football, though, if that's allowed.
Just think about the linebackers that play with the clubbed arms after they break like a wrist or something, and they have gigantic wrapped clubs, and they'll try to punch the ball out with the club arms. I mean, that seems like something that probably is a weird advantage, but also you have some broken bone underneath there that is probably extremely painful to you as well. Even with missing a game due to the collapsed lung, Johnson finishes the regular season with 1,613 yards rushing and 24 touchdowns. And did I mention that he was also working as a plumber during the regular season? He was doing 20-hour weeks as a plumber during the regular season while still playing for Boise State.
This is just one more reason why NIL is such a godsend.
Yeah, I almost would be worried that would take him out of eligibility because he's making money just on the side. I would think the NCAA would absolutely throw the book at him for that.
So we will get to this, but there are different rules for working on the side and using your position as a student athlete to advertise yourself financially. That's why I remember the UCF punter a couple of years ago ended up having to leave the team because he had a YouTube channel that was pretty big, but he would talk about, stuff they did at practice, and the NCAA said he was kept monetizing his student athlete position. So they do separate them, but this will come into play here. Because he didn't have the time between work, football, and school to become a certified plumbing apprentice, he was given the title of apprentice's helper. So he said, first day, they want to test me out. They want me to dig an 8-foot hole. There's rocks and gravel, and I hit the water table at 5 feet. They were like, wow, we didn't think you'd do it. So just all these middle-aged guys saying, hey, newbie who plays football that we watch, dig 8 feet into the ground for us. We didn't mean to actually do that.
We didn't think you would be able to do that. We were just fucking with you.
The owner of the company said of Johnson, he's digging trenches, throwing dirt, doing whatever we ask him to do. He's got a work ethic that is unbelievable. And one of my favorite quotes ever, Johnson, was talking about, the positives of being a plumber. He said, if I buy myself a new toilet, I don't have to pay the guy to put it in. I put it in myself. I'm just trying to imagine any other, this is Adrian Peterson, and I am installing my own toilet because I am working as a plumber during my Oklahoma seasons.
I think that just shows a lack of commitment on Adrian Peterson's part, frankly.
Well, so I briefly mentioned earlier there's a difference between a side job and advertising based on your student athlete profile. And so another important thing about Ian Johnson is that Ian Johnson loved crocheting. I should say he loves crocheting. Ian Johnson is still alive, so I'm assuming he probably still loves to crochet. But his mother taught him in high school, and he would spend an hour or two a day after practices just crocheting to clear his head. And this continued all throughout college. He made beanies that he sold to his teammates and friends to the point where he had back orders in the hundreds. Boise State had to ask the NCAA if this was okay. They said it was fine as long as he didn't advertise his services. Then ESPN ran a puff piece about him making the crochets, and the NCAA made him stop.
God, that's shitty. God damn it, NCAA ruins everything good.
The one thing, at least the puff piece had a really good closing line. Quote, Ian Johnson watches a play unfurl like the most intricate scarf or some elaborate equation of so many uniform numbers, waiting for the hole to open along the line. He can see the result developing. It is worth the price of patience. Another quick fun fact, Aaron Andrews actually modeled one of his beanies on the sidelines during the fourth quarter of the Oregon State game. After, it was a blowout, they're just talking about Ian Johnson rushing for 240 yards and 5 touchdowns. And for a good 2 minutes, she's holding up this brown beanie and just talking about it to the guys in the booth. Putting it on. Is a man of many talents.
Just showing off the beautiful crafted skill of it. No, that's phenomenal.
But, enough about plumbing and crocheting because this season wasn't over. There wouldn't be a low-level bowl in Johnson's future. Boise State finished the regular season 9th in the BCS standings, and this was the first year that the BCS National Championship was given its own bowl. So that means there was one more BCS bowl to fill. And under the new rules, there was a guaranteed spot for a non-automatic qualifier if they finished in the top 12 of the BCS rankings. And with that, Boise State was selected to play in the Fiesta Bowl against number 7 Oklahoma, becoming only the second ever BCS buster after 2004 Utah. So, Big 12 champion Oklahoma didn't really think much of Boise State. At Media Day, the aforementioned Adrian Peterson was asked what he thought about Ian Johnson. And he said, quote, "Ian Johnson who?"
Quote, hubris is on display early.
They were so dismissive of the situation, they didn't even realize calling us a Cinderella story. Cinderella becomes queen. David versus Goliath. Goliath gets knocked out. Pick one where the underdog loses.
He raises a good point there. I appreciate that he's that, culturally literate.
It's game day. Boise State gets off to a quick start with both Dreeson James and Ian Johnson scoring within the first 8 minutes. Halfway through the third quarter, Boise State goes up 28-10 when Marty Tadman picks off Paul Thompson, takes it all the way to the house. Boise's rolling at this point, but Oklahoma has a run in them. After an Adrian Peterson touchdown run and a Garrett Hartley field goal, Oklahoma cuts the deficit to 28-20. With 1 minute and 30 seconds left, Oklahoma scores again. To go for two, they end up having to try 3 times because of penalties, but they do convert to tie the game 28-28. Boise State gets the ball back. On the very first play after the kickoff, Jared Zabransky drops back and throws a pick six that gives Oklahoma a 35-28 lead with 1 minute left.
Brutal.
So at this point, Boise State has gone from up 28-10 midway through the third to down 35-28 with 1 minute to go. On the first play of the next series, Zabransky is able to get Boise State into Oklahoma territory. But then he takes a sack on the next play. And after 2 incompletions, it's now 4th and 18 from midfield with only 18 seconds left. Zabransky drops back and hits Dreeson James at the 35. James takes a couple steps towards midfield before laddering the ball to Gerard Robb, who would take it from the hook and ladder all the way to the end zone to score with 7 seconds left, sending the game to overtime. With all the momentum, Boise State ends up on defense first in overtime. Adrian Peterson promptly scores on a 25-yard run on the very first play. At this point, Boise State's saying, our defense is exhausted. We got to find a way to just win this game now. We can't keep this going. And so after a couple plays, they drive down to the 5, stall, and then it's down to 4th and 2. This is the game here. They line up halfback Vinny Peretta behind the center. He takes the Wildcat snap and throws the tight end Derek Schumann for the touchdown. And Chris Peterson has no hesitation. He's going for 2. Even with Oklahoma calling a timeout, he sends his offense back out there. Backup QB Taylor Tharp drew up a play that they called Statue Left. Boise State lines up 3 wide receivers on the right. Zabransky takes the snap, makes a quick pass to the right with his right hand, and then shifts the ball behind his back with his left, handing it to Johnson, who takes it untouched into the end zone. Boise State wins.
Is there anything better than winning a game on a trick play?
Well, I mean, I'm going to always, obviously, go to the Philly Special, which we didn't win on that play, but that's part of what makes that so incredible. And the fact that Tom Brady dropped it right before.
So, the legacy of this win, it's kind of immeasurable. This was one of the first times that a non-power school, non-automatic qualifier went up against a supposed big boy and really showed that they can compete and win. We talked about, I mentioned the 2004 Utah team, but they didn't really get the same chance because they were facing number 19 Pittsburgh, who only made it because they won a really bad Big East, and everyone expected Utah to win that game. That wasn't the situation here. This was Boise State, a small school, showing that they could compete with and beat the Big 12 champion Oklahoma. And that really is something of a catalyst for, calls for, a full playoff or something along the lines that would allow a team like Boise State to settle things on the field by letting them play some of the big boys. But, enough about that for now. That's a whole different discussion. Back to the game. After Johnson scores the 2-point conversion, he runs to the stands to celebrate. and the temporary stands in the end zone are full of his friends and family, and it actually breaks. And Johnson ends up in a dog pile that he called a pile of mass humanity.
And you're saying it's a dog pile of like all of his closest friends and family that are just crushing him.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some other people who were there too. I'm sure like other friends and family of Boise State players. But yeah, so they fall on him.
Horrific. God.
It takes a couple minutes for him to get out. He says, "As soon as I realize my legs aren't broken, I bolt." And they want to interview him because he's star running back, and he just scored the game-winning 2-point conversion. So he's getting interviewed on the sideline with his girlfriend, who's the head cheerleader of Boise State, Chrissy Papadix. And so during the interview, talking a lot about how they felt disrespected by Oklahoma, how everything Oklahoma said sounded like they were really not expecting much of a fight, and they were kind of just go past them easily. But then the reporter ends the interview by saying, "All right, I know you're going to propose to your girlfriend. Congratulations."
Way to fucking go. Like, way to nail that one, reporter.
They both appear pretty shocked. But then Johnson does get down on one knee, and the reporter says, "Oh, hold on. He's really going to do this." Making it sound like he was just throwing out a joke that he didn't know was something that Johnson had been thinking about. Johnson didn't even have the ring with him because he was originally going to do it later, but he kind of got thrown into it by this reporter. Somewhat similar to how when I got engaged, it was just me telling my dad that, "Hey, we bought this ring. We're not engaged yet, but we are committing to do it." And he started crying so much, we just said, "Fine, we're engaged." And that's how I got engaged. That's pretty much what they did here.
Always good when other people have such a large say in that decision.
We were going to do it anyway. And, Johnson was going to do it anyway, too. So Chrissy says yes, and big happy family. I saw a video of them being interviewed on the 10-year anniversary with their daughter. It was really nice. A bit of a fun fact. NCAA Football 08 comes out 6 months later with Jared Zabransky on the cover. And one of the ads was the gameplay of the statue left play with a Sooners player tackling Johnson before he gets into the end zone. And it pulls out, and it's Adrian Peterson playing the game.
You know what? That is a level of salt approaching Paul George calling Damian Lillard's shot a bad shot. That might actually be pretty close.
So Johnson has 2 more years with Boise State after this, but never reaches the same highs of the 2006 season. Gets a cup of coffee in the NFL, playing in the practice squads for the Vikings, Cardinals, Lions, and Dolphins. But after that, he retires, becomes an insurance agent through State Farm in Boise. And I actually found his office on Google Maps and his website. So I'm looking at 8000 Emerald Street right now with the big sign that says State Farm, Ian Johnson, and his very professional insurance salesman headshot.
I think we can interpret that as a charming amount of preparation brought to the episode and not creepy. I'm going to choose to interpret it that way.
You know what? He seems happy, and that's the important part.
And he knows that you are watching his happiness, and that brings him joy too.
Even if he didn't have like an NFL career or anything like that, he was the key man in what Sports Illustrated called the game of the decade for college football. The game that CBS Sports Line said the most meaningful bowl game played in 20 years in terms of impact on college football. Number 2, ESPN's greatest highlights ever, hosted by Chris Berman. This game still lives on in the impact it had, and Ian Johnson was the one who made that happen.
Well, I'm glad as we see the UCFs and the Cincinnatis start to continue that conversation. I'm not going to pretend like I was all that familiar with how Boise State came onto the national scene. I just remember as a kid when I was watching SportsCenter more, it's like, oh yeah, there's also just that one college in Idaho with a blue field. They're there for some reason. They're just those weird guys with the blue field, and it's very cool to hear more about it. Just to clarify, they had the blue field while Ian Johnson was there.
Yes, they had the blue field.
Okay, because I can't possibly ever think about Boise football without the blue field.
They had the blue field. Don't worry.
Blue fields forever.
What do you have for us, James?
Oh, my guy? Well, he hung around for a little bit longer, but without question, there was a moment where he commanded the consciousness of a nation more than any other point in an otherwise relatively mediocre career. I want to go back for a moment to early 1974 in Nashville, Tennessee. There's a guy by the name of Harry Lee Dickey. He's known as Horse to all of his friends around there for just being a phenomenal athlete in both high school and junior college at this point. He is on top of the world. He's got his girlfriend, Leslie. He just got a $2,000 offer from the Cincinnati Reds for a minor league tryout. Unfortunately, he knocks up Leslie, and the two decide to get married and have their child, put their dreams aside, and they have to raise the child named Robert Allen Dickey, better known as R.A. Dickey.
Okay.
R.A. Dickey is born later that year, October 29th, 1974, still in Nashville, and it's a fraught family situation. As you might imagine, it doesn't start on the best foot, doesn't end on one either. It does end pretty quickly, though. By kindergarten, they are already separated, and he's living between the two, both parents having some alcohol issues. One thing, though, that he remembers very early on that he loved about his father was that his father would fake doctor's notes, and he'd bring them to school to get R.A. out of class so that they could go either golfing or go to the batting cages, just take him out for that. Despite this, R.A. Dickey is able to, in school, be both a good enough student and a good enough athlete, with his dad's minor league baseball skills at least passed down to him. He is so good that he is able to get a scholarship to Montgomery Bell Academy. You guys familiar with the movie Dead Poets Society?
Yes.
This is the school that Dead Poets Society is based on. Not only that, Dead Poets Society comes out while R.A. Dickey is in high school at the age of 15 in this, and it came out 21 years and 1 day ago as of the day that we are recording this. Yesterday was the 23-year anniversary of Dead Poets Society being released, based on Montgomery Bell Academy, or as was known to its rivals, Mama's Bell Academy.
Did Dickey ever stand on a desk and say, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," to Robin Williams?
We cannot confirm that he did not. And so you are more than welcome to believe that he did. What he did do is perform very, very well in high school. His senior year, he had 3 no-hitters, one of which was a perfect game. These were all 7-inning games, but still is good enough that he is drafted in the 10th round by the Detroit Tigers after high school. Is the 277th overall pick, and while it is tempting, he decides, no, I actually want to follow a lifelong dream. I want to play for the University of Tennessee Volunteers baseball team instead. They have also offered him a scholarship, and so he forgoes his offer from the Detroit Tigers and goes to the University of Tennessee Volunteers, and it absolutely pays off. He is, first off, the 1994 Freshman of the Year. He is a 3-time All-American. During this time, he wins a bronze medal with the 1996 U.S. Olympic team at the Atlanta Olympic Games.
Yeah, Atlanta.
Yeah, he, in addition to getting the bronze medal there, he ends up with a 38-10 record overall throughout his college career, a 3.40 ERA. They win 3 SEC titles, and they make 1 World Series appearance. So a pretty well-accomplished career, good enough that it's going to pump him up from a 10th round pick to the first round, this time by the Texas Rangers. They offer him $850,000, but while all of the proceedings for his contract are going through, Rangers trainer Danny Wheat, he notices that there is a picture on Baseball Almanac where Dickey's elbow just looks a little bit off. And so he's like, hey, a doctor for the Texas Rangers, John Conway, can you take a look at Dickey's elbow? Just check it out. They find out that R.A. Dickey does not have a UCL. There is no UCL. That ligament just is not in his body. According to doctors, he should not be able to turn a doorknob without intense pain. And yet he has been pitching as a successful pitcher for roughly 8 years at this point at a competitive level.
Was he just never born with one?
So he may have been born without one. He may have unknowingly injured it and it atrophied away. All they know is that by the time he got checked out ahead of signing his contract, he does not have a UCL. For that reason, they actually lower his contract offer more than 90%. They go down from $850,000 to $75,000. This is a drastic turn of fortunes for our friend R.A. Dickey. He knows now it's going to be a long road ahead if he wants to go through the minor leagues. Luckily, though, he does have a good partner. During this time, during the last few years prior to this, he had become very friendly with his best friend's sister. His best friend, Bo, has a sister named Anne that during high school they were flirtatious. Anne transfers to the University of Tennessee during their college careers so that they can be together. And it's like, he's the star athlete, she's the country club girl, It's a 500-person wedding in 1997 when they get married. And that is just before he goes to join the Rangers organization. So he's with the Rangers for the late 90s into the 2000s, just working his way up to eventually the AAA Oklahoma City Redhawks. And from 2001 to 2005, he bounces just up and down between the two levels. 2003 is his longest look in the majors. He goes about 110 innings that year. And it's like a 5.6 ERA. He's a competent pitcher, but there's nothing really that they're loving long term. And at this time, he's got a really kind of underwhelming 3-pitch rotation. He's got a fastball in the high 80s, which, to be fair, is significantly higher than it was in his high school. One last thing about his college career that I do want to mention, actually, real quick, is that when he got there, it was the first time he ever had a professional training regimen. He went from 175 pounds to 210 in 1 year, just packing on muscle, which is what got him up to his high 80s fastball at this point. He's got an okay breaking ball. He does have one really weird fork ball that he calls the Thing with 2 capital T's. And finally, as we go into the 2005 season at this point, this is when he kind of realizes / has it pointed out to him that he's just kind of throwing a really hard knuckleball with the Thing. And so this is when he decides to pivot. And this is when we take a moment to talk about the knuckleball. In baseball, the spin of a baseball determines its motion at a most basic level. And so the way that pitchers grip with their fingers along the seams, the way that they move their hands as they release the ball, all of this is designed to give spin to the ball, which elevates good fastballs, which makes the break on sliders and curves. The idea of a knuckleball is essentially if someone can't do all of that, there's a last resort. And that is, what if the batter didn't know what was coming? The reason the batter doesn't know what's coming is the pitcher also doesn't know what's coming. The idea is somehow you're going to deliver it with as little spin as possible. Not no spin. You can't really get no spin. But essentially you kind of want to punch the ball really hard. And your grip is very important, obviously with the idea of the knuckle, when it was first developed by Eddie Cicotti, who is more famous for later being a part of the 1919 Black Sox. But he is credited as one of the very first people to throw like a real knuckleball starting around 1908. And he's gripping it with his knuckles. It continues to advance. In 1945, because of the war, the Washington Senators run out the first ever all knuckleball rotation because that's just who was available. They were called the Knuckleheads. It's fucking great, but that's a story for another day. This continues to develop, and part of the reason it develops is because another special thing about the knuckleball is there is a fraternity, so to speak, of the pitchers that master it. It is a very difficult thing to do, and you're not typically going to be on a roster where anyone else in the organization really has a lot of baseline knowledge about it. And so some of the greats, like during his lifetime, Hoyt Wilhelm, famously the Necro brothers, Phil and Joe. This time, a contemporary of the Necros, Charlie Hoff, was very big. It's actually Charlie Hoff kind of latches on to R.A. Dickey at this time, because anytime someone starts trying to do the knuckleball, the old knuckleballers all come out of the woodwork to try and help them along. And so this is when it's legitimately like a cabal where once he starts doing it, Charlie Hoff is helping him. The Necro brothers come in. Tim Wakefield is really kind of integral to him adopting the using your fingernails version of the knuckleball versus just the straight on knuckle. You can still get a good grip for very little spin with that. They're all helping him out because everyone that uses a knuckleball pitch, they represent all of the other knuckleballers. And so they are just very much about making sure that the tradition is well represented. So he's worked on the knuckleball, and he comes into 2006, and the 2006 Rangers do not have a lot of preseason expectations. So they're like, yeah, sure, we'll give you a start. And all he does is give up 6 home runs, tying the modern era record with fellow knuckleballer Tim Wakefield for the most given up in a start. It is his only start with the Texas Rangers that season. They promptly sent him back to Oklahoma City, where he spends the rest of the season, his final one in the Texas organization. And now he begins a little bit of an odyssey. He almost goes to Korea because he gets a starting offer from the Samsung Lions. They're like, we'll put you in the rotation immediately. You'll be one of our aces, essentially. But he turns this down because he instead gets a minor league offer in this winter from the Minnesota Twins. And a month later, in the Rule 5 draft, he is taken away from the Minnesota Twins organization to the Seattle Mariners. And then the next month, January, The Seattle Mariners work out a trade where they are sending someone else to the Twins in order to maintain R.A. Dickey's rights despite not keeping him on the major league roster as a Rule 5 draftee so they can send him to the minor leagues. So he has signed on with the team, been drafted away from that team, and then had a special loophole created in a trade just so they could still send him down to the minor leagues at this time. He comes up a little bit with Seattle, but essentially is a non-factor for them that year, appearing almost exclusively in relief. The next year, wouldn't you know it, he signs a minor league deal in the offseason with the Minnesota Twins again. Except this time he does stay with the Minnesota Twins, appear with them throughout the season, and then pass on. So continues to just not really catch on anywhere. He's at this point thrown about 440 innings in his career. He has .9 WAR. Could not be a more replacement level player. But teams continue to want to see something in it because one important distinction about R.A. Dickey's knuckleball is a typical knuckleball. We'll take Tim Wakefield, again, one of his contemporaries as an example. 16 mile per hour range for his knuckleball because that's another thing about it. It can vary wildly in velocity with all of this spin change. It sat from about 58 miles to 74, averaging in the mid-60s. R.A. Dickey throws a 20-mile range first off, so even more wildly disparate. And he goes from 63, touching 83 sometimes with it, largely sitting about 10 miles per hour faster than Tim Wakefield. The big thing about this is while you want the knuckleball to fly off in crazy directions, if it's moving faster, it has less time to go too crazy. And for this reason, R.A. Dickey, despite not being the most effective, he has much lower walk rates than other knuckleballers. And this is eventually what convinces, ahead of 2010, the New York Mets to take a chance on R.A. Dickey. They signed their AAA Buffalo Bisons, and very early on in this season, Luis Castillo and Oliver Perez were supposed to be the rotation mainstays for the Mets. They just completely collapsed. The two of them are just absolute garbage for the first 2 months. Very quickly on, the Mets are like, all right, we got to get something. This guy down in the minor leagues, he's doing great. Yeah, come on up. R.A. Dickey, start throwing knuckleballs for the Mets. And he does. And 2010, up to that point, best year of his career. Ends up starting 26 games, goes 11-9, very, very well balanced. 174 innings altogether, career high 104 Ks, and a 2.84 ERA. He ranks 7th in the league in ERA this season. At this point, prior to coming to New York, that move to New York was the 37th time he had moved his family during his baseball odyssey. Between all of the minor leagues, between all of the trades, 37th time. So in that offseason, he's looking for some stability. He is so ready to take the 2-year extension that the Mets offered to him for about $8 million altogether. That $8 million proves to be a steal. 2011, it's an average season, but it's more than the Mets are getting from pretty much any of their other pitchers, as Johan Santana is frequently injured, and all the rest of them, again, are garbage. Oliver Perez and Luis Castillo are both cut very, very early on. Whereas R.A. Dickey sets, again, career highs in games started, innings pitched with 208, 134 Ks. His ERA is 12th in the National League, so he's a well-ranked pitcher. And what's more is R.A. Dickey, being now in New York, gets a little bit of media attention, so we get to learn a little bit more about R.A. Dickey, the person. And he is kind of interesting. He's a huge nerd. He majored in English literature back in college. Never got his degree, but majored in English literature with a 3.34 GPA, which was academic All-American. He has a couple bats. He doesn't bat a lot, but he did play in the National Leagues often. So his bats are named Orcrist, which is one of the swords from Lord of the Ring, and Hrunting, which is Beowulf's sword. And during this time, anytime he comes to bat, his walk-up theme is the Game of Thrones theme music. He's a big old dork. He also, I'll admit, he puts his money where his mouth is philanthropy-wise. Between the 2011 and 2012 seasons, he offers to forfeit his salary potentially if he gets injured doing something for charity. That something is climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. He and a catcher and bullpen catcher that he knows from the Mets organization climb Mount Kilimanjaro to raise money for sex trafficking and human trafficking in India. He is telling the Mets, I understand that if I go up here and get injured, I will not receive any part of my contract for the upcoming season. But he does come back safe and healthy. And he even releases a book this offseason called Wherever I Wind Up, My Quest for Truth, Authenticity, and the Perfect Knuckleball. Talks about some heavy stuff in here, among that some childhood sexual abuse that he endured, some suicidal thoughts that he felt. He does also pull Alexander Hamilton and tell everybody about his infidelities to his wife in this book, which is not phenomenal, but they seem to have mended things since then. And this leads him to what is now going to be inarguably the greatest knuckleballer season of all time. In 2012, R.A. Dickey, from the get-go, has just an incredible pitching season, a streak that early on Phil Niekro says, like, I had some runs. No one has ever had this. Part of that is he has gotten his strikeout to walk ratio down to an obscene 4.26 Ks for every walk. That is unheard of for a knuckleballer. He just has a year where he controls this unruly pitch more than any other pitcher had managed to for a sustained period of time. We want to talk about one-hit wonders. He's got a couple. He actually, back in 2010, had a really fun one-hit wonder against your Phillies. He beat them, but I'd say it's fun because the one person who got a hit was starting pitcher Cole Hamels. But in 2012, he becomes the first person since Dave Stieb to have back-to-back one-hitters. In those two games against the Tampa Bay Rays and the Baltimore Orioles, he goes 18 innings, gives up 2 total hits, 1 run, 2 walks, 25 strikeouts. It is a level of control that no one has ever been able to inflict on just this bizarre pitch. It happens to conveniently come out during the time that a documentary had already been made about Tim Wakefield and R.A. Dickey during this chase. Knuckleball, and I have to say that with a lot of emphasis because knuckleball is spelled with an exclamation point at the end if you're looking for the documentary. Knuckleball follows the two of them with Tim Wakefield chasing his 200th win and R.A. Dickey, conveniently for the production of this, having a Cy Young season. It goes on to be both his first All-Star and his first Cy Young season. His only Cy Young season, 20-6 record in 33 games started. It is career highs in innings pitched, 233. Career highs in Ks, 230. 5 complete games, which maybe more than anything demonstrates what his college teammate Travis Copley called his bulldog mentality. This guy's an absolute workhorse. He's going out there trying to throw as hard and as much as he can. It ends with that Cy Young award. He gets a number of congratulatory phone calls. He only answers one of them, and that's the one from Phil Niekro, who had, of course, helped guide him to this season. This is, by far, the most notable thing that R.A. Dickey managed to do, and part of that is because after this Cy Young season, again, he's only made $8 million over these last 2 years, and the Mets realize now he's probably going to ask reasonably for a little bit more money. The Mets, having just had some issues with Bernie Madoff ruining the finances of the Wilpons, are not going to be able to afford R.A. Dickey. So what they do instead is they trade him and a pair of catchers to Toronto for Noah Syndergaard and Travis d'Arnaud, primarily. He goes to Toronto, where he just continues to be an average pitcher who puts up 200-plus innings most years. He only fails to do that in 1 year at Toronto, but he also fails to, at any point, exceed 14 wins. In fact, in all 5 of the years following his Cy Young season, he has an ERA plus of 101. He is, again, almost exactly a replacement-level pitcher. His 4 of those years in Toronto, I did say 5 years, that's because R.A. Dickey's final year, I don't know if you remember, is with the Atlanta Braves. Sorry, the Atlanta baseball team. At this point, he's 42 years old, and he is not the oldest player on this team, because ahead of this offseason, the Atlanta baseball team made the decision to sign both R.A. Dickey and Bartolo Colon. Because of this, R.A. Dickey decided that the name of the two was going to appropriately be Big Sexy and Little Ugly. He continues to have an average career. He has 160 innings or so for the Atlanta baseball team. He had signed a 2-year contract initially. After the 1 year, he decides to not play out the last one. And this is the end of R.A. Dickey's baseball career. He is largely stuck to just kind of being a family man since then, although he does occasionally come out when he sees high school and college pitchers attempting to learn the knuckleball. He understands that it is his responsibility now to carry on this. He owes the debt to the Brotherhood, and he pays that off the other aspiring members of it. This incredibly weird secret council of knuckleballers. I love that, first off, he is a very average pitcher. His full career, he's got a 4.04 ERA, right on the line of 4. He has a 120 and 118 record. I mentioned in the 5 years after his Cy Young season, he had an ERA plus of 101. In the 9 years preceding his Cy Young season, he had a combined ERA plus of 99. R.A. Dickey, for almost his entire career, was just a guy that found a gimmick and was able to be average. But for one crystallizing season, he was able to, partially because of just the perfect storm of when certain marketing things were trying to happen, with his book, with the documentary, with climbing Mount Kilimanjaro ahead of a season. All of this just happens to time with this perfect moment to recognize not just him, but the decades of this just weird-ass pitch that a few guys have successfully done. R.A. Dickey is not going to join Phil Niekro in the Hall of Fame anytime soon. Phil Niekro is in the Hall of Fame as a knuckleballer because he was able to hold on to it a little bit longer. He was able to actually be, other than Juan Franco, one of the oldest players in baseball at one point, while R.A. Dickey does tap out after year 42. But what a journeyman, and what a journey, man. And what a one shining moment for that guy. That's my guy, R.A. Dickey, Robert Allen Dickey.
I love getting the extra context about being a nerd and climbing mountains. Climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in and of itself is like an athletic feat. You could have been like, hey, like there's this person that like never climbed, but they climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and I would have been like, all right, yeah, that qualifies. But then he's also one of the greatest knuckleballers.
Yeah, giant Lord of the Rings fan at the same time. Although, to be fair, the amount to which he follows the lore is questionable because he did mix up Orcrist, which is also referred to as Biter by Thorin Oakenshield when it is mentioned in The Hobbit. He did accidentally refer to it as Sting, which is the other elven blade that is found along with Orcrist, but instead wielded by Bilbo Baggins and later his nephew Frodo Baggins. I'm telling on myself here, but R.A. Dickey was telling on himself when he did mix those two up, so I'm just saying.
Fake fan.
No such thing as a fake fan exists. I'm glad that he's a giant nerd. For the record, didn't go back to finish his degree, but has gotten an honorary doctorate since then.
Speaking of honorifics,
it's time for us to honor someone, but who are we going to honor? Fellas, what are your thoughts?
so I love Ian Johnson because I mean that was for me one of the formative moments in me becoming a big college football fan was that whole season. That was also the App State beat Michigan season.
I almost picked Armonte Edwards.
Listen, Armani Edwards had more than one shining moment because he also decimated Delaware in the national championship that year. So I would have disqualified him because I would have said too many moments. But no, Ian Johnson. I mean, especially like, listen, I'm a sucker for the romantic aspects of sports, and there's no more romantic aspect of sports than proposing after the seminal moment of your football playing career to your girlfriend, who is also the captain of the cheerleading team. I don't know if you mentioned that part, Xavier.
Yeah, she was the head captain of Boise State's cheerleading squad.
Which is good because it means she was not in the stands with the rest of the friends and family that almost crushed him.
No, she said that she was actually trying to find a way to get to him just to give him a hug. But she was trying to make her way through all the people on the sideline.
I don't know how badly he wanted a hug in that moment after being crushed.
Well, I'm sure he was happy to see her.
True.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm leaning Ian right now. I would say that, but I'm curious what you both have to say.
So I do want to say that I love the nerd aspect of R.A. Dickey as a big Lord of the Rings fan myself. But I'm also thinking about the fact that he was a third starter for 6-7 years and then had the one ace year. And like I know 120 wins, 118 losses, 4.04 ERA. That's like pretty average, pretty much right in the middle. But it was still like enough where people wanted him to pitch for them for more time than I went to undergrad and law school combined.
I hear that. I will also admit I sort of understood the assignment as someone that was around for a long time but didn't necessarily command attention except for one. So part of this just might have been my understanding of who I was meant to necessarily bring to the table. And if that's the case, hey, we all make mistakes.
I do also love R.A. Dickey though, I need to say. I love the weird things that emerge in sports, and there's no more weird thing than a guy that throws an extremely specialized pitch that doesn't necessarily even require immense physical abilities. It just requires guile and stick-to-itiveness to learn it, I think.
Guile was very good. I see what you did there.
Guile,
What does Clover think? Let's let Clover make a vote here.
Clover thinks that he needs a WALK, probably, is what he's so hyper about.
I mean, I think R.A. Dickey would probably be the person best equipped to play fetch, and so in that case...
But you said his walk rate was so low.
It was pretty good. That's pretty good.
All the dog puns.
Diaz, I will remind you, he had bulldog mentality.
He did have bulldog mentality. Unfortunately,
Ian Johnson had the collapsed lung, where we can have the X-ray of this is that dog he's got in him.
I mean, the thing that I'll say for Buster is, I think he is the most classic example of this that there is in like all of sports. I think. Now, I don't know that means that he needs to necessarily win this category. I do love Ian Johnson. But I do need to say, like, one-hit wonders. It was a few hits that finally put Tyson down. But he won the belts. His next fight, he lost the belts, and then he didn't fight again for 6 years. And then he went into a diabetic coma. Like, that's...
I shouldn't laugh at that.
And then came back and then fought again.
As you say, he's trying to fight again now, which might even almost disqualify Buster, I feel like. The fact that he's trying to get back in that ring.
That interview was given... First of all, yes, get back in the ring. But the interview was given like 2 years ago, like right as Tyson Jones was happening. So it was in that context that he said he would come back. It wasn't like it's not like he's out there openly campaigning for it.
We'll allow it. I mean, yeah, like if someone's sticking around for a long time with mediocre production, with one shining moment in that is not what we were looking for, then in that case, I will acknowledge Ian Johnson probably wins this one out. So if that was indeed the assignment, then this was your call, Diaz. I can defer.
Do we have a call of acclamation?
It is this hall's great honor to induct the man who set up pipes for number 2, but he's number 1 in all of our hearts. Ian Johnson. Capturing his love's heart on national television with the proposal and capturing our unanimous consent to enter into the Hall of Guy. Congratulations, Ian.
Well done. Well done. Well, with that, we have some very important Eastern Conference hockey for Xavier to be able to tune into. We have some very important basketball to think about tomorrow. And you know what? There's very important basketball going on tonight. There are some WNBA games. Be sure to turn those on, 3 days ago when you hear this. But that's all I've got for you guys tonight. I've been Chris Hardwick.
I've been the very special guest, Xavier.
I'm Diaz, and as a little secret fact, I don't know if you guys knew this, but the boxer Triple G? Yeah. All 3 digits actually stand for guy. He's guy.